Hi, my name is Hiba Umar, and today I'm going to share a conversation with Dr. Peter Bishop about futures. Would you just like to tell me what is a futurist?
Okay, my pleasure to tell you this, and it's wonderful to be with you. Thank you for inviting me. A futurist is a person who is focusing on change, generally change in society, and tends to be long-term change, fundamental change. A lot of people are interested in change. Economists are interested in it. Journalists are interested in it. But we tend to be thinking about changing in longer times than they do. So the economists tend to look out a year or two, maybe, and
Yeah.
journalists, oh, sometimes even just next month or next week. So we're talking about changes in 10 to 20 years. That's basically generally what a futurist is doing. We work in change in two different ways. One is that we describe the way the world could be in that time frame, 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And we also help people influence change and make the future better for themselves. So those are the two major divisions of the methods of the field.
Oh, that's a wonderful answer. So, what was your inspiration in life that inspired you to become a futurist?
I had studied both philosophy and physics as an undergraduate in college, and the philosophy was not I wasn't going to continue, but I thought I would be a physicist. But then I looked around and I said, this is really interesting things going on in the world, in change and revolution and people creating. I didn't participate so much in those protests, but I observed them and I was close to them. And I said, I think I'd like to go to school, not in physics, but in sociology to study social change. So my inspiration was what was going on in society at the time. And it was wonderful. I had read a couple of books about the future. I didn't know there was a field. I just thought those were kind of interesting books. And so I picked up on social change within my degree in sociology.
Oh, that's a nice story. So, before you started the Teach the Future program, could you give us any example of any work that you did that you were like super proud of and that you would like to tell your grandkids as a story?
Absolutely. No, I have to tell you that the time between when I graduated in sociology in 1973 and when I began the Teach the Future program in 2013, so what is that, 40 years or so, I was primarily teaching, first of all, sociology and statistics at two different universities, one in Georgia and at the University of Houston, where I first started working in 1976. I came to find out, however, that sociologists did not really study social change. Well, wait a minute now. Where are students going to learn about change unless they learn about those people who are studying it or who know about it within society? The problem is the way that the profession, the academic profession, is structured. You have to do lots of research and you have to get publications as quickly as possible. So if it takes too long to do your research, you don't get your dissertation done, you don't graduate from graduate school, you don't get a job, you don't get tenure, et cetera, et cetera. So almost all the studies in sociology are done on short-term kind of issues like family, institutions, politics, whatever. Very few study long-term change. So I was disappointed that I'd chosen a field that didn't study long-term social change, which I was interested in. And nobody else did either. So it wasn't like the wrong field. There really wasn't a field like that. So I moved from Georgia to the University of Houston. And in my initial interview with the dean of the school at University of Houston, I looked over the catalog and it had this master's degree called Studies of the Future. And this was 1976. And I said, what studies of the future? And he was a very forthright man. He didn't beat around the bush. He said, we study the past, don't we? Well, yes, sir. I said, I knew that. Why can't we study the future? Well, I had a lot of reasons why you couldn't study the future because, oh my gosh, I was a scientist. I didn't study ghosts and I didn't study things that didn't exist. But I kept my mouth shut. I got the job and came to Houston to teach statistics, which I did for 6 or 7 years until 1983, when I started teaching in the futures program and eventually started running that program and developing the curriculum and doing all of those things. So I did that for 30 years. I'm very proud of the fact that that was the first degree. I didn't create the degree, but I truly did develop it, moved it to the University of Houston Central Campus, and put the whole program online. It was the first graduate degree online at the University of Houston. So I almost say graduated, when I finally retired, got out of school in 2013, I had basically built that program, and it's still going very strong. It's better than it even was when I was running it. So I'm delighted to say that I'm very proud of that program at the University of Houston.
That's wonderful. And so kids in Foresight, how do you think they gel together? Like, what prompted you to start Teach the Future program?
Well, I had been talking about the future at that time then for 30 years. And I actually started working with teachers before I retired around 2010. A woman who was an economist came to the University of Houston in 2009 to take the degree and then become a part-time instructor at the university. And she was a wonderful teacher and very dedicated to young people as well. So we teamed up in those years to offer programs for teachers around the Houston area so they could start teaching the future. We also ran a summer camp. Kay Strong was her name. We ran a summer camp for middle school students from 6th to 8th grade students, and it was a whole week long, and we introduced them to the future. They were very happy with it. It worked out really well. Kay went back to Ohio, which is another state in the US, and without her, I really didn't have the time running the program to continue that. So once 2013 came and I retired, I said, I've been talking to adults about the future all my life. Graduate students, older students, companies, government agencies, doing training, doing public speeches at conventions and things like that. I said, who is talking to young people? And I looked around and I said, nobody. Young people were studying, they were working hard, they were learning, they were growing up, but their teachers did not know how to teach about the future, and therefore they were not putting it into their classes. So they were entering adulthood in a world of intense change and in some cases intense disruptions without the mindset and without the tools to be able to navigate change and indeed influence that change for the better, for themselves, for their families, for their communities, indeed for the world as a whole. So Teach the Future arose out of the fact that the young people had been kind of left out of the discussion. I mean, the future studies program, the field, really begins formally in the 1960s and maybe even the 50s. So there've been 70 or 80 years, 50 or 60 years of young people being left out of the discussion. So I figured it's time that young people got into the discussion and starting to talk about, because of course their time in the future will be a lot longer than us old people's time. And so we want them to be able to use that time as well as possible.
Okay. So, do you think that the voices of children are being heard in terms of shaping the future?
Unfortunately, no. That's a simple answer.
Yeah.
That's why, and so I've been doing Teach the Future now for about 10 years formally, and very small progress. There are organizations like Teach the Future and a few other of our partners that are trying to bring to the discussion, give them voice, and I can explain a few of those ways that we're doing it. But the amount of voice that young people have in the discussions about the future is very, very small compared to what adults do, and compared to what companies do, compared to what political parties do, compared to what government agencies do. And it's just a sad aspect of our time is that we love our children. I believe most people do. I mean, we really do appreciate them. We take care of them. We keep them safe, but we have not introduced them to this subject yet. We should, but we haven't done so.
Yeah, kids do need future rights. So, in your work as a futurist, do you think that future generations were also considered?
Uh, no, I would say that's a great question because how shall I put this? Let me describe what I believe is the society of today. And I mean modern society. Since the middle part of the 20th century, we've had a society that is based upon two fundamentally different and very important institutions. One of those institutions in the economy is called capitalism, of course. Investments, creating new innovation and new technology and other differences has changed the world a great deal. And it has propelled many people into a life which was historically unprecedented and almost unimaginable. The other is, in some countries, democracy, the political institutions, there where the people themselves are allowed to pick those who will be their leaders, those who will be in charge of that society for a time. So capitalism and democracy are the two mega institutions of our society. And I would unfortunately say that children play no role in each one of those, because in the economy, they generally do not participate in the economy. Their parents do, and on their behalf they do, but they don't make independent decisions. They're not buying things generally. They may have an allowance or a small job, but they're not important when it comes to the economy. And unfortunately, in democracy, they don't vote, and as a result, they don't have the same voice that other age groups have. And so the modern society, has not yet acknowledged the fact that their future should be on the table, and how they're going to live, and they should have a voice in doing that. In terms of paying attention to future generations, that's a particularly difficult problem. And I try and give people who don't do this, and that's most people, the benefit of being okay, because if you are going to spend time and money and attention on future generations, you're going to have to take that time and money and attention away from present generations. There's only a limited amount of time. There's only a limited amount of resources in our world. And so if we allocate part of it to the future, then we are taking part of it away from the present. And people don't like to do that. They say, wait a minute, we have all of these problems today. Why aren't we solving these problems? Why are we worrying about future problems? Well, I think it's our responsibility, ethical responsibility, that we take care of. Ethics is about how we treat other people, well or poorly. I think that future generations should be included in our ethics. How are we treating the future generation? But it's it's a fuzzy concept to most people. My gosh, we've got people today who are hungry, people who are in danger, and whatever, and we should solve those problems first. And I can't say that that's the wrong attitude, but even for well-intentioned people, not people who are just greedy, who are just taking power and money for themselves. Of course, they don't care about future generations. But even people who want to do good are oftentimes focused on the present, where the real issues are, and they don't want to take time or money away from that to focus on future generations. So it's a very difficult time. The analogy is, how much money do you save versus how much money do you spend in any given month or year? If you have a little bit extra, it is always a good idea to save it so that you can protect yourself against something unfortunate happening, or invest it for some greater good in the future, of course you should do that. But a lot of people would prefer to spend that money on themselves and their families today. Some of them have to. They don't have extra. They're basically trying to put food on the table, keep a roof over their heads, and they don't have any way of invest or saving for their own future generation, much less the future generation of the world. And I think society is a lot the same way. They would prefer to spend it on the current generation that is spending the money today, the current generation that is voting on issues and leaders today, and not so much on a future generation, which is a problem. I don't think we've got a mindset yet that says, oh, we should be putting part of that money away. Not a whole lot. It doesn't have to be, half. It could be a small percent, but something should be put away so that future generations can have a better life.
So what do you think, what role are you playing in that? What role are you playing for future generations' voices to be heard?
Well, those future generations are the young people of today, just like yourself. I mean, giving you voice. So we run programs. Umar just worked with us on World Future Day, Young Voices, which was on March the 1st. And we had young people. We had over 100 young people under 25 act as facilitators and as participants in that program just a few weeks ago. So that was just a general discussion. It was not talking to government. It was not talking to business people. It was just talking among ourselves. What would young people like to see in the future? And frankly, what their voice is not, well, first of all, when young people speak about the future, they are automatically talking about future generations because they're talking about their world as it will be in the future. They are the future generation. There are future generations that are yet not born, which we should also pay attention to. But my gosh, the next generation of leaders, the next generation of consumers, the next generation of voters in our society are alive today in school and in the young people's world. So since it's their future we're talking about, we should consult with them. We should hear them. We should listen to them. So we run programs like World Future Day so that they can have some degree of voice. It's still a minuscule thing compared to all of the voices in the discussion, both economic and business voices and consumers and government voices and all of that. Those are very loud, and they're very strong interests, very strong institutions that are saying what we should do in the discussion. And so next to that, the voice of young people is unfortunately pretty weak. So I'm just trying to raise the volume, get more young people at the table so we can put them. They're not going to run the future. They're still young, and they don't, as I say, they don't spend much money, and they don't vote. And so that their voice is always going to be not as strong as the interests of today, but it should be stronger than it is.
Yeah. So in a personal opinion, do you think that us kids and future generations, do you think we will um inherit a dystopian future, or do you think the future will be bright?
Well, I have to tell you that being a futurist means that I don't answer that question. There are alternatives. We have some challenges in the future which could result in a world that is less happy and less beneficial to people in general, young people as they grow up to be adults. That's quite possible. And some people believe likely. And yet we also have a lot of tools and a lot of people who are working to make the future better. So we leave it on the table. We don't decide which of those we are going to, which of those are going to appear, which of those are going to happen. We say those are scenarios. That's the way we deal with the future, because in 10 or 20 years, frankly, and anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen is wrong. They don't know. They think they know, but they don't know. And so we leave it open. So let's say, yes, those dystopian futures are quite possible. Our challenges are huge. But at the same time, we have been through many challenges as a human society before. We can run through the list of everything we've studied in history, and there were problems, and a lot of things could have gone wrong, and some of them did. And yet in other cases, we have survived, we have gotten better, we've solved these problems and challenges. So it's very much like, I mean, we are entertained oftentimes in the media with movies, with books about that have a lot of drama in them, a lot of conflict. Oh, are the two lovers going to get together, or are they not? Or are they going to go off and they're not going to be able to get married and have children and all of that? We don't know in the middle of the story. We don't know what's going to happen. So we're involved in a real life drama. The world as a whole is involved in a real life drama. I would say the characters are, let's just take climate change. The way we burn fossil fuels is warming the planet. That's the villain of this story. And yet we have people who are inventing technologies that will reduce that and make that less. And we have governments that are trying to pass regulations and laws against a lot of opposition. So those are the good guys, if you will. So we have the good guys and the bad guys in this world. You hate to put it so starkly, because even the bad guys, they're doing something which had been going on for hundreds of years. They didn't invent fossil fuels, they found them. They didn't invent business. They are the inheritors of other people who ran businesses. So they're not wrong. They're not like cruel crooks or criminals or people like that. At the same time, if they continue to do, and if the public allows them to continue to do business as they have, and governments allow them to do business as they have, then we will have the dystopian future. But there are a lot of people working very hard, both socially and technologically, to try and turn that around and make a better world, a world that's not quite so dystopian. So I don't know who's going to win. It's the middle of the movie. We don't know. The conflict and the drama continue.
Yeah. So the children of today will coexist with multiple generations like X, Y, and Z. So do you think that they will ever be heard or will get a chance to speak about the future?
Well, the generations X, Y, and Z will grow up. All things considered, they will become the leaders and the adults of the world. Now you say, are they going to be better leaders or worse leaders, or kind of pretty much the same? And again, no one knows that. That's a scenario. Given their experience today, we believe it's possible that they could take future generations into account. These are the first generations that have grown up with the future on the agenda. We didn't have any future studies when I was growing up, or even the Gen Xers and the Gen Ys very much. But young people of your generation are now actively involved, many of them, in trying to understand the future as a thing. And so you may be better leaders. You may be more prepared to give up some of the present concerns, consumption, voting, for future generations. That's a scenario. I would hope that happens, but I can't guarantee that it will. So, I mean, my beginning of studying social change and sociology was in the very turbulent 1960s in the United States. It wasn't quite a revolution, but it was very unsettling. And we thought, our generation, and I was in that generation, we're going to change the world. We did some. We changed some important things about the world, but we didn't change the fundamental institutions. Business was still business, and government was still government. And so the interests of a certain group in society were heard more loudly than the interests, I believe, of most people, and certainly the interests of young people. So we didn't change that part of the world. and maybe your generation, I certainly hope so, and I'm working as hard as I can to bring your generation to the table so that they can learn about and indeed influence the future that they are going to be part of. I hope the Gen Zs, particularly, who grew up with the future as a subject, will be a little more sensitive to future generations than my generation has been.
Yeah, it's very mixed up.
Yeah,
So
it is mixed up. Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. Yes, it is mixed up.
so well, I'm kind of out of questions because you're way too good at answering them.
Well, I have talked about this for a long time. I'm sure some people said, "Oh my gosh, is he going to ever stop talking about the future and young people?" No, I'm not going to. I'm going to keep doing it. But it's been a pleasure talking to you. Let me share a vision that I have, that, and it's a vision because it's kind of ambitious, well, very ambitious, and that is that young people are, as I say, at the table expressing their interests for themselves, for their families, for their world in the 2030s and 2040s and the 2050s. Your generation is the generation of this century. My generation is the generation of the last century. We had our time. We're going to move on, and you're going to take over. And my hope is that you do better, frankly, than we have done in many ways. How does one in your generation, however, learn to influence the future? How do you learn to be what I'll call leaders? Not necessarily in charge of things, not bosses and CEOs, but people who are promoting change, leaders like Greta Thunberg, others, young people who are she's a leader. She didn't own anything. She doesn't run anything, but she has a great influence, and other leaders that we've known. How do you learn to do that? And I believe you have to learn to do that as early as possible while you're still young, while you're in practice, while you're in school. And what better way to practice influencing the future than in your school? You're in your school, I presume, almost more waking hours than you are at home or in the community, whatever. So my vision is that young people say the influence we can have today is ultimately on climate change and poverty and war and all of the things that the SDGs are about. But frankly, and I will get, if this is news to you, I'll be surprised. You're not going to change a whole lot of that. I'm not going to change a whole lot of that. What I'm trying to change is the climate of schools, that a school says you should not only learn the basic subjects like math and science and literature and history, you should learn how to be a citizen. You should learn how to be a leader in schools, and the schools should encourage young people to have their voice. What is a school that you would like to have? Have a vision experience among students in the school. What would you prefer to happen? I would love to see schools do that. And as a young person, you may adopt that vision, talk to your friends and your classmates in school, and say, let's move to do this one small thing, maybe make the school a little bit less carbon footprint, maybe have a little bit more discussions about the curriculum, or a little bit more discussion in class about activities rather than just hearing lectures all the time. I don't care what it is, as long as it's something where you and your colleagues, because you can't do this by yourself, you and your colleagues get together and respectfully go to the school and say, we would like to have a voice in how this school runs. I mean, if young people in the world started there, I believe they would learn how to influence change. And when they grow up and get out of school, they would then have ability to influence change in their communities, in their neighborhoods, in their businesses, and as citizens in their government. That sounds almost impossible, but not quite. If it's obviously, if things are impossible, then it's a waste of time to do it. But it's almost impossible, but it's not impossible. So I would encourage you to think about that. Be a leader now, and not to say that you're going to get kicked out or do the wrong things, but respectfully say, we would like to have a voice. And you can be the first person in your school to say that. I would love to hear that from you and from Umar as you go forward. So you have the opportunity to be a leader even today. You don't have to wait until you're an adult to do this.
That was some wonderful advice. Thank you very much.
Okay,
And as we're wrapping up, I would like to ask you, was there anything on the back of your mind that you would like to share and you just didn't get a chance to say it?
No, you gave me the chance to share my vision. My vision is that as not only should young people be at the table about society in general and have their voices heard, which is what we usually think of, but they should have their voices heard even more strongly in school and in the educational institutions. These are institutions who are serving you, and they should be serving you as you wish them to. No one can ever get everything they want. And we're not going to kick and scream and be like little kids and have a tantrum when we don't get what we want. But we can approach powers, which schools have powers, the teachers and the administration are powerful people in your life, and approach them with respect and say, yet we would like to change this. Let's have a discussion about that and learn how to do that. Because if you're an adult, you're not going to have any more power in the larger institutions of society than you have today. It sounds like a lot, but unfortunately, schools have been structured so much that we don't give students voice in their own learning, in the learning environment that they're spending 5 days a week in. We basically impose that on them for their good. Teachers and administrators are trying to do the best they can, but I think they could do a little better and said, let's talk about what kind of a school you would like to have, what kind of a school you think is best for your learning and for your growing up. And if we could find an administration and a school that did that, then I think we would be on the way to approaching and having this generation have a better future than they would otherwise.
And thank you very much for your time. And I had a wonderful.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having this podcast. And I look forward to seeing the edited version when it comes out. Okay.
I hope you enjoyed, and maybe
I did.
maybe I'll get a chance to interview in the future as well.
I would love maybe someday we actually see each other. It would be wonderful. So good luck to you in your quest to understand and influence the future too. All right. Thank you very much.